another presentation, and it's from Chief Brown. He's going to give our police department's annual report. So Chief Brown.
Thank you. We're going to try and figure out how to manage on 2 computers so that everybody can see it. So so everyone...
Once again, if we could get that presentation onto this other screen. I know that's a Janine or Brandy solution. Just that way we can see it too.
While they work on that, I'll just give a little overview as to why an annual report is being done at the end of July. So much of this data is compiled and provided to WASPIC, which is the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. That is due middle of April. They provide a draft to everyone in the state, and on July 15th, I'm sorry, on July 1st, and by July 15th, we're allowed to have submitted our changes, and then we get it returned. So it took us about until now to be able to be ready to present this to you with all the data. So I know this is a little bit pedestrian, but I want to cover exactly what crime reporting is and how it's relevant to this report. So crime is anything punishable by possible incarceration. So the data collected for this is through our officers' report management system, which is also something that is being updated here in this county. It is then adjusted and corrected by our administrative services department, and that is reported to WASPIC. And it is based on the National Incident-Based Reporting System, or NIBRS. And this is a monthly aggregate that doesn't just report a crime, but it also has a lot of other aspects that go along with it, such as the circumstances and context, location data, time of day, and clearance codes. And that allows us to have a little bit better picture than just saying a burglary was reported or we arrested a DUI. Finally, they are separated into Group A crimes and Group B crimes. So Group A offenses are crimes against persons, crimes against property, and crimes against society. Now this could result in an arrest, but this is based upon the reported crime, not necessarily an arrest. Oops. Group B offenses are actual arrests, and these tend to be on-view arrests, generally lower level crimes such as trespassing or DUI or other various crimes, and I will show you as we get to our next slides. So this is a statewide crime profile, and I feel like we need to break it down a little bit because it does show that crime is down 3.7%. However, crimes against person are up 4.1. Crimes against property are slightly down, but crimes against society is down 49%. And the reason that that's significant and why I think it masks a little bit about what's happening statewide with the crime is that has to do with narcotics primarily. As we know with the Blake decision and some of the confusion about how to manage individuals that are struggling with addiction or other codependent issues, there have not been a significant number of arrests throughout all of our communities just because there hasn't been a clear path forward on how to make sure that those are handled appropriately. The Group A offenses were cleared by arrest or exceptional about 18.9% of the time. That's across statewide. Clearance by arrest or exceptional means exactly that. We know who it is, and we've either made an arrest or we've made a choice when working with the prosecutors that we will not take that person into custody. An example would be someone who is already serving time in one of our prison systems. There's no reason to continue to prosecute that person often, or it doesn't serve in the interest of justice, so that would be an exceptional clearance. Homicides are up about 5.9% to 325. And we had almost 2,000 assaults on law enforcement officers last year with 1 officer killed. So this is our crimes against person. I apologize, it's about as big as I can make it for everyone, but I wanted to kind of talk about some of the data in there that's important. One of the things that's also important to note is that percentages can look dramatic, but we have to look at the totality of the data that is presented. So the first one that I want to call your attention to is a sex crime. We went from 2 to 14. That is an increase of 600%. However, it is only an increase of 12. We believe that in looking at our data, the most likely explanation for that is the school resource officer that we had, where younger students felt more comfortable reporting those type of crimes. We are working with the school right now to see if it's still going to be feasible for us to have a SRO in the schools upcoming, but those discussions are continuing. Our assaults are up about 21.7%. Some of those are domestics. As you can see, we had 191 reported. 80 of those are domestic offenses. The others are just throughout town. And then our violation and no contact orders and protection order violations, those are also up nearly 22%. It's amassed a little bit with the vision of you guys up there, but not as many of them appear to be related to DVs, but that also has to do with the arrests. So they may have been related to a domestic violence, specifically because both of those orders are domestic violence related. They're just not reported as that if there's another issue that's involved.
Chief, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely. Feel free to stop me at any time.
Is it possible that there is one individual that has 2 crimes to get arrested for and shows up here twice?
Both of those crimes would show up if they are Group A crimes. Yes. Good
So
question.
Assault and
Yeah. So if there's an
protection order
assault,
violation come to mind.
correct.
Chief, could you elaborate for a second about the SRO discussion? Is that from our side due to staffing, or is that an issue with the school district?
A little bit of both. We are still, as we all know, we're working on our staffing issues. We're getting much better. I'll be able to brief out to that on my staff report at the end of the evening. We're also working with legal to make sure that we manage well within state law and state law's expectations. There are some difficulties there, but we're working on it. Thank you. Moving on to property crimes, this is where we start, and I'm sorry, I'll back up one thing. I'm trying to run 2 computers here, so I've got some notes. So just so that we understand where we are in relation to the state, our crimes against persons are up about 17.4% over 2020. Again, we did have a little bit of a jump with the crimes that were reported via the high school, but we recognize that there are more assaults that are occurring. So moving on to crimes against property, these are up 14% over 2020. And again, we also have to remember that 2020, the majority of the year, we were in lockdown, so this is not necessarily as fantastic sounding. It's just something that we are paying attention to. So our robberies are up by 75%, but again, the raw numbers are a little bit more important to look at. We went from 8 to 14. So as much as that is a significant percentage, I'm not as concerned with that. But you can also see that our thefts, and especially our motor vehicle thefts, are up amazingly high. And it's also important to note too that in 2020, the reason that we had so many vehicles being stolen in that year is that we had several dealerships that were burglarized, keys were taken, and a number of vehicles were removed from those dealerships. So to be above that number yet again, and I know I've told the mayor, I may have reported out to you guys already, first half of 2021, we were looking at about 3 vehicles that were being stolen per month. By the end of 2021, we were averaging about 28. So again, a significant jump. Property disruption is up about 31.3%. This relates back to some of the assaults. Just the level of criminality that we're seeing has gone up, but we are working on that. We do have some plans, and we'll talk about what we're going to do moving forward at the end of the presentation. What is important to note too is our fraud offenses are down almost 60%. If you remember from last year, the reason that 2020 was so high is that the funds that came from the federal government through the state for COVID relief, there was a pretty significant fraudulent attack on that system, and there were a lot of our community members that were victimized by that. Any questions on crimes against property before I move on? Crimes against society. Again, this is important to note. While this is down about 65%, the biggest reason for that is narcotics-related criminality. Because we've been struggling with statewide with how to manage the results of and the outcomes of the Blake decision, the arrests for narcotics violations have dropped significantly, as you can see. But I want to talk about, it's not all doom and gloom. So if we look at the trend since 2012, which is, I believe, when we last had a large annexation here in the city, we've flatlined a little bit. We are up from 2019 to 2021, but we are not close to where we were back in 2012 or even 2014. We believe that this is something that is manageable, but something that we want to make sure that everyone is aware. This is the state profile compared to Port Orchard. You can see that crimes against persons are a little bit bigger slice of the pie here in the city, but not significantly over what the rest of the state is experiencing. And we also have to understand that the rest of the state also encompasses small rural areas that do not necessarily have a lot of crime, and then we have to compare ourselves as equally as we can to large municipalities. And as everyone knows, law enforcement's been struggling with staffing issues, and that can certainly affect a lot of how our community members view that social contract. So when we talk about crime rate, and we'll compare ourselves to our neighbors here in Kitsap County here momentarily. We have to remember that every community is unique, and we all have different aspects, whether or not it's geography, whether or not the economy, the socio-cultural impacts, even just being closer to a military base can often bring that crime rate up or down. So I just want to put that in context before we compare ourselves to the rest of the county. So last year, our crimes per thousand was 86.9, with an increase in crimes across the board, with the exception of crimes against society. It's not unreasonable to assume that our crimes per thousand are going to go up. The state average was 62.5, but again, we have to remember that there are smaller rural counties that factor into this. Kitsap County, when you average it across all of the agencies, is 55.3 per thousand. That is down from 2021. And this is how we compare to everyone else in the county. Like I said, a lot of this has to do with unique circumstances for each community. And again, we are a pass-through to, I mean, if you want to get anywhere in this peninsula or you want to go anywhere in the Olympic Peninsula, you either have to go through us or you have to go through Shelton, and we are easier access. So that tends to bring some things through that other communities may not have. This is our clearance rate. While we are slightly below the state average, I'm fairly comfortable with where we're at. Bremerton is higher than us, but part of that is their general investigations unit was more intact than ours was. We operated with our detective, who was also pulling double duty on patrol on Graveyard. So we focused primarily on major felonies, which also makes it difficult when we're managing property crimes. And as we have talked in this chamber before, we're having some issues with people who steal things and then don't choose to stop for us. So that makes it harder to identify them and arrest them. So our Group B arrests, again, these are the on-view arrests. Nothing really to say here aside from I want to point out that while we did have a significant amount of property that was stolen last year, we did recover over $500,000. For what we were operating under and where our detective was, that's a pretty impressive number for us to be able to do, to recover a third of that. And I wanted to show a little bit about calls for service so we understand kind of what happened middle of last year when the legislation took effect. So prior to the legislation changing, we were averaging about 600, I think it was 668 per month. And in the last 9 months, we've averaged 820 calls for service per month. And that is just community-generated 911 calls. That is not everything else that we are trying to do. So when you compare us from 2017 through 2021, I'll walk you through these numbers as well. So in 2017, there's about 7,878 calls for service. Those are direct 911 calls. And those are calls that we responded to. Those are not necessarily, hey, 10 minutes ago, I believe I saw a DUI getting on westbound 16. That's not something that is counted in these numbers. Those are calls that we respond to. In red, those are proactive calls. Those are officer-initiated calls, such as traffic stops. And you'll see a fairly decent drop in 2019. And so part of that is that at the end of 2019, we identified some things that we were doing that didn't have a statistical purpose. So every time we create a call with Kitsap 911, there's an associated bill, as there should be. It's a service that we are paying for. So there were some things that we were doing that we didn't need to document in our CAD system. An example would be if Mason County calls and says, hey, we've arrested Rob Putansu, and can you please confirm the warrant? That is not a call for service. That is something that we would do, but we wouldn't need to log that into our dispatch system. Another example would be patrol checks. So if I drive through your neighborhood, or what we would do previously, we would say I'm patrol checking John Clausen's neighborhood. Well, that's part of what we do anyway. We don't need to document that through our CAD system. That's something that we do. So we said, hey, we're going to drop a lot of that stuff because it's just duplicative. Moving into 2020, with the pandemic, calls for service kind of remained steady, and the 911 calls did. And you can see that the result of us saying not only we're not going to be logging a lot of these calls that have no purpose, but we asked all of our staff to be safe, and we reduced traffic stops to public safety only. So high speed, things that are causing risk, not necessarily non-moving violations or that person's going 5 or 10 miles over, because we wanted to keep our staff safe. And then in 2021, so this, the majority of those, as you saw, From the previous slide, we've now jumped up to almost 8,900 calls per year. That's a significant jump, especially when we were dealing with the staffing shortages and not adding staff since 2012. And before you ask the question, the green, those are other calls for service that we may not necessarily have to have an officer respond to. Those would be your patrol checks that we may do on occasion and some other minor issues, but those are not necessarily time consuming. Any calls on, or any questions on that slide? So kind of the takeaways, again, our crime is up about 10.7%, while it's down statewide 3.7%, but this is directly related to an increase in persons and property crime. Our on-view arrests are up slightly. That's for trespassing and some other non-traffic criminal violations. Our most common remain theft, burglary, and vehicle theft. Our case clearance rate is slightly below average, but I believe that will be changed, especially with Deputy Chief Main moving back to a sergeant's position, and then the GIU sergeant that we have and a detective. And as we continue to staff up, we'll be able to start making more arrests and solving more of those crimes. So kind of next steps, and I want to talk to you as well about what we have done to work on some of this. So regionally, we have very good relationships with all the rest of the agencies throughout, and we work collaboratively, not only in training, but also when we identify problems that we need to solve. As we all know, a problem in Bremerton doesn't stay in Bremerton, doesn't stay in Poulsbo, doesn't stay on the island. People move around. And so when we were experiencing a significant increase in vehicle thefts, we were able to put the intelligence that each agency has together and identify our top 10. We then worked with our prosecutor's office in the jail and said, we are going to go find these people that are victimizing the community. We need you to hold them. And we were able to successfully do that and watch the drop off. While some of these statistics may be concerning, there is a recognition that a very, very small percentage of people commit crimes in our community, and we need to be able to be intelligence driven when we go look for that. We don't just drive around and hope it falls in our lap. So we're continuing to work on that. We are also working on some of the speeding issues. We've been working with the State Patrol. They just had a high impact vehicle emphasis on Thursday of last week. This morning we held our own. We pulled over about 30 vehicles this morning just between Olney and Bethel on Bay. And this did issue a number of tickets. So we're doing that not only on where people are providing complaints to us, but we're also using data. And we're saying, all right, well, where are collisions occurring? We get a lot of complaints on speed in McCormick Woods, but that's not necessarily where our collisions occur. They occur along the Bethel corridor and then also on the way out to Mitchell Point. So we have one per week going on through the end of August, and I'll be able to report out on our success for that. And the State Patrol is also doing their emphasis in course that we participate in on a weekly basis. Any other questions that I can answer for you?
Go ahead, Councilman Clausen.
I have more of a curiosity question, and I'm sure that you collect this data, but I don't know that anybody really analyzes it. But do you have any statistics or numbers of the folks that you encounter and deal with are city residents versus non-city residents?
I may be able to pull that. I don't have it tonight.
Your earlier comment you mentioned about proximity to a naval base or military base may have some impact. So I'd just be curious more than anything else. And then I guess I'm just assuming that as we staff up and add more officers, that to some extent some of these crime stats will go up simply because we've got more people out there catching the bad guys in the action. So it might be minor, but it would be something that would influence the numbers.
Correct. Certainly for the Group B, because we'll be able to have time. As it stands right now, with the exception, of about 1 in the morning till about 5, when it's a little bit slower, our team is going call to call to call, which is why when we say, hey, we need to start working on these traffic problems, it's an overtime assignment. I think that the Group A crimes might not necessarily go up. Those are generally associated with 911 calls where a crime has occurred and we are called and we respond. But I would agree with you. I think that if we can be more proactive and we can identify people that are out prowling cars, we know the people that go to Walmart on a regular basis, and if we can be proactive in identifying them, and, locating them and solving that problem before it becomes bigger, I think you'll see those numbers, probably crime for Group B, but reduced for Group A.
So Chief, I just want to thank you for the traffic emphasis out there. I know we're all seeing a lot of aggressive driving out there, a lot of speeding. I know we're not out of the woods yet. Our staffing's getting better, but we're not out of the woods yet. I know we don't want to burn our officers out. They deserve their days off, but when they're willing to work some overtime, I think it will make a difference in our community, and I appreciate them stepping up and willing to do that.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, so that we can put this out public, the next one will be August 2nd from 11 to 2 p.m., and that'll be on the Blackjack Creek Bridge. So if you guys were thinking of speeding through there, I would recommend that you don't, because there's low tolerance. There's evidence and data that suggests that warnings are not effective in creating significant slowdown of traffic. So, and if you don't mind, just to report out as well on our staffing. So Nick Smith will be off of FTO. This is, I believe, his last week or last week and a half, so he will be on his own on August 6th. Mike Bradshaw, whom you met the other day as well, he is currently on FTO and doing really, really well. We find a lot of success with our FTOs, and they can sometimes shorten the amount of time that they're in field training and then get them out on the street quicker. Dakota Melton started last Monday. He's very excited to be here. Unfortunately, the first 2 weeks are generally pretty dull because it's reading policy and HR stuff, and so we're keeping him on, but he was able to get into the academy earlier. We initially had a mid-September date, but there were some cancellations from some other agencies, so he is going the second week of August, and we do have one currently in background.
Go ahead.
Another question, the governor's just come out with his plan to add more facilities in the state. I'm assuming that would accelerate the time from hire to being on the street because you can get them in the academy quicker?
Possibly. We actually have been, I'm going to knock on wood here, but we've actually been pretty fortunate that our candidates either get in on time or get in early. Sometimes you can use relationships to make that happen, but I would suspect that would be the case, but it's going to be some time. We've talked about bringing an academy out to Kitsap County. Part of the issue is you then need that many more trainers, and all of us are experiencing staffing issues, and I know that we have at least 3 that I think would be fantastic academy instructors. We can't spare them. In speaking with the other agencies out here, like, it's a great idea, but none of us have anyone that we can dedicate for 10 to 12 weeks.
If I'm not mistaken, the governor's plan provides for more locations, but the legislature would have to fund more
Oh, yeah,
classes
that was his
to
plan
staff
that he's-
locally. Yeah, I think,
He's presenting to the legislature, and obviously would take them to move forward with it as well, so.
yeah. And I just want to take, we did recognize and our 2 field training officers, and they were the employee of the quarter, the 2 of them, for the additional hours and days off they've missed training our new officers. So it was important to recognize them for their efforts. Any questions for the chief? All right, let's move on to our business
Thank you.
items. Thank you, Chief.